Yeah,
we are right.
Hello, everyone. It is 11:40. We are going to get started on time today. I'm going to do something. Clap once if you can hear me. Sorry, I have small children. Touch your nose if you can hear me. Actually, that's my favorite thing for anyone that's ignoring you. Touch your nose if you can hear me. You're not ignoring me. I love that you guys are all talking and engaging. That's what the goal of today is. It's so wonderful to see all of you here. Thank you for joining our session. We are going to be talking about unlocking deeper insights, strategy, measure, and visualize with Google tools. So I am Elizabeth Costello. I'm a technology experience advisor here in Boston at a global health consulting firm called JSI. And I'm presenting with Bruna.
Yeah, and I am at Evolving Web, and I am a senior product and digital strategist.
And full disclosure, we were just introduced recently and are new friends presenting on this topic together, so we'll get more into that. But our agenda is this is a quick 20-minute session. We're going to go through some assumptions and our session goals. I'm going to introduce you to the case study, the project case study, and our challenge. Then we're going to go through, Bruna's going to go through a roadmap for using Google tools to unlock those deeper insights. And then we'll talk about some of our results. And I will try not to talk so fast. So some quick assumptions here. You have some sort of basic understanding of Google Analytics you may know how to add a Google tag to your site, Drupal site, WordPress site. We will be talking about a Drupal site today. And we are going to be providing a high-level overview of these tools. They take a long time to really learn Tag Manager and some of that deep implementation. So we want you to have a flavor for the tools if you haven't been introduced to some of them, know what your next steps are. But we won't be getting into deep implementation instructions. So our goal here is to use a real-world example, the reproductive health national train. Come on, it's an awkward door position. Feel free anytime you need to come and go to come join us. We're going to be talking about the Reproductive Health National Training Center. This is the project that I work on. We're going to talk about how our project moved beyond those generic Google Analytics reports. How are we really tracking what matters to our client, to our team, and how do we put those into dashboards that could inform action? So the Reproductive Health National Training Center, we are our challenge, well, I'll jump to this slide. Reproductive Health National Training Center, we are funded by the federal government, the Office of Population Affairs, Office on Women's Health. We provide training and technical assistance to health providers specializing in family planning and adolescent health. We average about 1 million page views a year. We have some 80,000 user accounts. Users can come to the site, they can find resources, they can create an account and create training lists that they share with their networks and track that training. So it's a little bit of a custom learning management system. We've had the site for going on 10 years now. It's built in Drupal. It's been through several refreshes, has a lot of content and information. And what I also want to say is that JSI, my company, we built and maintain the site. And then the project we're talking about today, the dashboard I actually worked with Emily Patterson. She's with an organization called eMeasure. So she helped me build this dashboard, so I wanted to give her some credit there. I'll share her contact information as well. Okay, so our challenge here was we needed to go from those really basic GA4 reports that I could set up myself and I could read myself and I could download and did a lot of filtering in Excel, trying to get some of this data, but I really was really struggling to get some of those deeper insights of our user behavior. So we have this, we have our tagging structure on the back end for all of our metadata. The biggest real, not issue, but the challenge of the site is that we have two primary audiences, the family planning audiences and then the adolescent health audiences. They're actually represented by two totally different cooperative agreements, different funding sources. We also get funding from a third source, Office of Women's Health. Our funders want to know how the work that they're funding is performing. They don't want, and when everything is a resource / your page path, Google Analytics doesn't know who funded that page path. They don't care. And then we have tons of content on the site. Those training lists that I was mentioning earlier that users can create, we have close to 2,000 of those. The resources that you can build are, we've got different resource categories, resource topics, over 700 resources across the two audiences. training evaluations. So we really weren't, with the basic Google Analytics reports, we really weren't able to differentiate how content was performing between those various audiences. We weren't really, like, we have these deep toolkit pages, right, where you have like 27 resources on the site, you have a navigation menu, you're not sure, are people using that menu, are people, the long scrolling content, where are they engaging? We weren't able to see that, the impact of our content strategy. And then again, most critically, we really needed to be able to report to our funders, how those different work streams were performing. So that's when we knew we needed to get much more, go much more deeper with our measurement strategy. And that's when I engaged Emily, but I'm going to turn it over to Bruna to talk us through that.
Yeah, so Emily did the setup for this, but I'll be walking through just generally high level how it was done, since we do this for others. So essentially it's a little bit like a trip, right? How do we get from point A, which was our starting point, and in this case it was a Drupal site with structured data, to our final destination, which is an actually meaningful analytics dashboard. So starts with recruiting the right players. You know, a lot of the time, sometimes if you're scrappy, you can fill, you know, a lot of these roles, but you probably are going to need somebody who has content kind of expertise, mostly because they're going to know the types of questions that you need to answer with the data about the content, and they'll also understand, right, how the site is set up. What are the fields and taxonomies and the metadata that you really need to harness, right, to be able to create these reports. And then also an analytics manager, right? So if you're one and the same, right, content owner and analytics manager, that works. But essentially you might need to know, right, what Google Tag Manager is, Google Analytics, Looker Studio, and kind of how you can transform those questions that the content owner knows that the stakeholders have into the actual data you want to track. And we'll talk about that in a second. And then last but not least, a developer. So somebody who knows how to clean and format the data, and also how to do a little bit with the JavaScript used by Google Tag Manager. We'll talk about kind of what roles these folks play. And then you also need the right tools, right? So I'm going to show you this all now, but as we go through the slides, like if I say a word and you're like, I don't know what that means, we'll probably cover it. So it starts with, right, the right tools. Structured fields in a CMS. So Drupal is great for that if this is a Drupal audience. This can also be done in WordPress and lots of other CMSs. But right, you can see how for every resource that was on the site, there were tabs, right? So which training category is it, what topic, and then what program, right, does it map to? There's more information about funding sources, and this is all on the back end. So end user is not necessarily seeing all of these things, but the data, right, exists in the CMS. And these are surfaced via the data layer. Now, this is probably where you're hearing that and being like, the what? Unless you're already working in analytics. We'll talk about that in a second. Then, that data is picked up by Google Tag Manager. And when we talk about Google Tag Manager and GA4, if folks are using that in the room, Google Tag Manager is the one kind of listening for these things, and then the data is pulled into GA4. We'll talk more about that too. And then, last but not least, right, when an event is triggered in Google Tag Manager, that information is going to funnel into GA4, and then you can create an actually meaningful Looker Studio dashboard using that data. So how do you do that? So we also follow the right steps, right? So first, we started point A, we talked about that. And then you define what data you need, and early, especially if this is a site where it's a new build, or it's a new dimension, or a new type of content that you need to track. Often I think what happens in these projects is we say at the very end, oh, we need to measure stuff. But it really should be something you define at the start, and that you create a measuring strategy that's tied, right, to what fields you're going to have and all this other stuff. So you start with the questions that your stakeholders are asking, right? So in this case, one of the questions was, what content topics are readers most interested in, right? And then you identify the data that you need to answer that question. So content, we know content topics are probably the information that we need. And then what are they most interested in? And you can look at that with a lot of different metrics, right? Let's say in this case, page views. We know that's standard in GA4, but how do we get the information about the content topic? And then we want to make sure that that information exists on the back end. So kind of what I was saying in terms of the content was really well tagged, that's important, right? Because that's the data that you can leverage to be able to do this. So if something doesn't exist, if the data doesn't exist, you can't track it. So it's important to be thoughtful, right, as you're structuring your site, that you're thinking about setting this up early. So for example, for them, a multi-select field in all resource pages where content editors select at least one content topic from a pre-established list, right? And then 2, you surface the data via the data layer. So when I first heard about the data layer, I was a little bit like this. I'm not a developer. I was just like, it sounds like it's the Matrix and very confusing. Where is it? It's invisible to me, right? And it kind of looked like that. But what it actually looks like is like this. So it's essentially a behind-the-scenes container that's holding that structured information from your CMS, so it can be picked up by tools like Google Tag Manager. Essentially, it's surfacing, right, what this back-end data is that already exists, so that it can be consumed. So, right, structured fields in the CMS, for example, content topic, surfaced by, in this case, this is a little bit of the how-to, the Drupal data layer module. I did also look into the equivalent for WordPress. I know those are not the only 2 CMSs, but there is a plugin for WordPress called Google Tag Manager for WordPress, and that can do something similar. And then, right, Google Tag Manager can then grab the data. So then we use Google Tag Manager to send the data to Google Analytics. So Google Tag Manager listens for user activity, right? So page views, clicks, downloads. And then a trigger, right, like a page view happens. So this is like the end user, they visited this resource, right? Now, then GTM is gonna fire an event to like read content. And this is a custom event that was set up by Emily. And essentially, right, when that event is fired, that event has parameters, right, or extra details that are captured. So you can set up, when you're in Google Tag Manager setting up your events, you can define what the other parameters you're tracking are. So in this case, right, it captures things like event parameter, resource purpose, or page topic 1, page topic 2, even intended audience. And so you can track, right, things like Elizabeth was saying, the funding source and all of these other things, as long as that data exists. Now, an end user is not necessarily seeing this, right? Maybe in this article they might see topic because it's also a filter, but right, they're not seeing things like who's the funding source for this or this other data that's important, but not to the end user. And then the record of that event and that data collected is then collected and becomes visible in Google Analytics. But we know that Google Analytics, especially with GA4, is not producing a lot of these reports that are super helpful, especially to stakeholders, right, who are not going to go into the platform and really try to dissect these things. So that's when you can use Looker Studio and build a dashboard to kind of visualize that data and tell a real story. So, right, you can build a Google Looker Studio dashboard, and it turns that GA4 data into something interactive. So, for example, following the kind of topic we were talking about for resource topic, right, you can see what the resource topics are that are most popular based on page views. And you can set, right, and Elizabeth will talk about this in a second, you can set a lot of different filtering and things like that. And that's something that's a lot more meaningful and visual, right? It's a data visualization to be able to show to stakeholders. Now, why can you use Looker Studio? Again, GA4, often the reports are not exactly what's most compelling to a stakeholder. You have to do a lot of manual cleanup, and that's really time intensive. But Google Looker Studio is free. There's other options out there like Tableau, if that's something you want to use. This one, right, is good and integrates well with Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager. You can turn, right, there's a lot of setup you have to do in order to create those dashboards. So it's not like it's, snap of a finger. But it's easier than, right, going through PDFs and creating your own graphs in Excel. And essentially, right, the dashboards can be customized to match your brand, and you can filter and share those dashboards to the folks who need to see it. And I'll pass it back over to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Brian. So I'm going to talk about how we actually use, why did we bother making this dashboard? I think we're gonna touch on one of the most important things that I want you to take away, which is like, if you're not collecting it now, you can't measure it later, right? If you do not have that tag on the back end, and you come in a year later and you want to say, how are our Spanish resources, because we actually added Spanish content to our site, how are they performing? And if you weren't figuring out what language is inherent to Drupal, but still, you're not going to get that. You're going to start collecting that from the point that you have the tag. But then the second most important thing I want you to take away, like, is don't measure data that you're not going to use, right? Like, and I think we all fall kind of. I definitely don't always follow that advice, but I try to remind myself of that advice of like, why did we even collect this? Sometimes it's like nice to know, and we like to know about it. But in terms of like how we're actually using our data, yes, we're using it to report back to our funders primarily, right? But it really helps our team because this project is kind of unique in that a lot of our traffic is driven by these grantees that have training requirements. And we had seen for like 5 years, the top content never changed because it was always the training requirement content, right? So that was fine, like, but I could have told you that without doing any of this. So these dashboards helped us get into some of those more niche topics, the things that they were the added bonuses, they were not the training requirements. So when it helped us see like our users going beyond the training requirements. It's not pictured here, but there's a whole menu. There's like 10 pages to the dashboard itself. One of the really wonderful ones has done like toolkit page. I can look up any toolkit on the site, and I can see which resources were the most accessed within it, and I can see how people are people using the navigation at all. Like the scroll depth, you can see the engagement, right? So that's the engaged users measurement within GA4. So anytime you have that deep scrolling, long scrolling form content, being able to see like what percentage of users are opening it and then abandoning it. And yes, I could have gotten that in GA4, but it was so much more challenging. And in terms of operationalizing it, with the Liquor Studio, we have it set up so that it sends a report out to we have a team of like 50 people that work across this project because doing all the training, that they don't work on the website, they develop all the content. And it sends them a report, and they can go and sort of look at the area that they're interested in or that they work in. So if you're in charge of fiscal operations, you can specifically jump to the content that you've been working on so much quicker. So that's really like enabled our team, really helped them with content refreshes because a lot of our content gets updated annually. I don't have to pull that for them every time, or someone from my team doesn't. I still do it for them. I can say you can use the dashboard to do this, right? So we make sure that we look at it monthly. I'm of course looking at it for anomalies, but then we report on like a monthly, quarterly, annual basis. But yeah, I do try to find different, like we meet with one of the specific sub teams and like go through the dashboard with them. So like again, the takeaway is try to apply what you're measuring and don't just have it there.
Yeah, even I think for content like prioritization, right? If you have limited resources and you have a lot of topics, what do we need more content on, right? Because it's performing well.
Oh yes, sorry, the one thing I didn't mention, we have a whole search term analysis section. In the search term dashboards, you can compare what people are searching within your site, and then you can pull in the external Google search. That has been phenomenal. I regularly export those search results to our teams, and I have them. We've done, we code the results to see. We've used the search term analysis actually to update our taxonomies, so we can see people are searching for it one way. Is that how it's presented on the website? We've done some taxonomy refreshes. It enables us to make content decisions around, do we want to add something in? We're enabling AI search right now, so it's been interesting. You can see no one searches by phrases because we haven't enabled, trained them to do that. They all search by keyword. So it'll be really, when we launch that soon, it'll be really helpful for us to test how that's performing. Anyway, so I love going into the dashboard, but yeah, I try to get my teams to go into as well. So the takeaway here, we had some of the takeaways. If it's not tagged, you can't measure it. And don't measure what you're not going to use. But then when you align your goals and tools, you can move beyond those basic GA cookie cutter reports that tell you something but not everything, and really help to unlock those meaningful insights that are going to tell you more about how your users are engaging with your site. Thank you. So I've shared we have our contact information here. My colleague Emily, who helped me with the implementation of the dashboard, her website is there as well. She does some trainings. But we're here to, I think we're exactly at time, but we're here to answer any questions if anybody wants to stick around. Thank you so much.